CSGO was one of the biggest tactical shooting games in history. Coming from the iconic Counter-Strike franchise, it was one of the biggest games of the last decade. It was making Valve millions of dollars in skin purchases alone, and Valve really didn't have to do too much to keep the game alive. However, as new titles like Valorant and Rainbow Six Siege were released, it began to cut into the player base Counter-Strike once had a monopoly on. Valve realized their cash cow was eventually going to run dry. They decided to release Counter-Strike 2, which was supposed to modernize the Counter-Strike experience to make it palatable to another generation. The only problem is, Valve has become more of a game platform company than a development studio, and CS2 has actually been a huge downgrade compared to CSGO. Today on Poseidon Films, I wanted to discuss how Valve fumbled so hard and just why it is that Counter-Strike sucks now. The first thing I want to talk about is the engine in the game. Obviously, toward the end of CSGO's life cycle, the source engine was starting to feel dated. It had become old enough to drive a car itself, and gaming technology had really advanced since the mid-2000s. Valve decided that CS2 would be launching with the new Source 2 engine, and before getting our hands on the game, everyone thought this was going to be a huge upgrade. The problem is, the game feels incredibly clunky. I think I saw it described best when someone said that movement in this game feels like you're slogging through mud. While in CSGO movement did feel somewhat controllable and natural, the Source 2 engine makes everything feel like there is a bit of input delay when you try to play the game. They are still running official servers with 64 tick instead of upgrading to 128 tick like every other shooting game. My PC is honestly pretty overpowered for a game like CS2, and even I find myself having micro stutters and issues when being around other players. At first, I thought it had to be something in my settings, because there is no way Valve would release a game with an engine so unoptimized you can't even be around other players. But as I dove into forum posts, it appears tons of people with top-of-the-line PCs still find themselves with micro-stuttering issues even now. People complain of frame rate drops even on brand new computers, and this really does hurt Counter-Strike's reputation. One thing the game was always known for was being able to run on a potato. Now you actually need luck on top of an elite PC to enjoy the game as intended. I understand that upgrading engines comes with some issues, but Valve is just too big of a company to have not known this was going to be a problem. You don't become a billion-dollar company by accident. The same company that made the Half-Life series is also responsible for this half-finished engine that doesn't really work. Not to mention the change to this engine meant the end of macOS support. I know not many people game on Mac, but it was just another change that made the potential community even smaller. The engine doesn't feel great when you're trying to engage in combat either. In CSGO, I felt like most of the time if you saw someone and shot them before they shot you, you were likely to win the gunfight. The new engine causing micro stutters, lag spikes, and feeling more clunky means gunfights are much less satisfying. There are times I get kills on people who clearly aren't even registering me on their screen, and it makes it much less fulfilling to have a good game. On the flip side, it can be infuriating to die before you even see anyone and get shot through what appears to be a solid wall. The engine and network for this game just feels incredibly dated for what it's supposed to be a top-of-the-line shooter. I do want the game to be as good as it can be. I have well over 5,000 hours in CSGO. I just feel like Valve needs to actually dedicate time to their game. It feels like since Steam is such a money printer, they have lost all their ambition to try to release a solid product. It doesn't help that the pro scene doesn't seem in love with the game either. Counter-Strike has always been an immensely competitive game, and the pro scene has been an important facet since its early days. Even players like Simple have said they don't really love the way the game plays and feels now. I know that pro players loving a game doesn't mean that it is good or bad, but it just is a sign that things aren't perfect on any front. If casual players are having a bad time and pro players are having a bad time, that means there isn't really any community who is going to fall in love with the game. I think Counter-Strike has one of the most loyal fan bases in all of gaming. I mean, think about how long this game has really been one of the most popular out. For several decades now, it has been a hit amongst gamers, but this version has left a lot to be desired from almost every facet of its supporters. I know anytime a new Counter-Strike is released, it has a rough period, but Counter-Strike isn't usually facing competition the way it is now. That makes it a lot more pressing to solve these problems sooner. Games like Valorant and Siege are gonna keep stealing players from Counter-Strike if they can't get their act together. I don't think CS is a game that will ever truly die, and it will always have some fans, but look at how Valorant was able to take a vast majority of the top-level North American talent from the Counter-Strike scene when it was released. Look at how Siege offers a competitive tactical shooter with a different feel with a developed pro scene. In the past, CS was really the best and only option for a game with lots of players on PC. Now they are having to face the reality that there is plenty of competition that gamers are able to go spend time on instead. I love CS, but you can't deny Valorant has done a huge amount of damage to their community. The Valorant Championship last year had a peak concurrent viewership of 1.6 million, while the last CS major had just 200,000 more viewers at its peak. CS should be dominating a young game like Valorant considering the deep history it has with gamers of several generations. I also think Valve has lost the plot when it comes to their monetization practices. The move to free-to-play was a great idea to compete with Valorant, that is fair. But them removing core parts of CSGO and then hoping the community purchases premier upgrades feels backwards. They basically said, okay guys, I know in the old game you had Danger Zone, Arms Race, Competitive, Premier Competitive, and the other game modes, but you should give us more money in exchange for us putting the game on a worse engine and removing Danger Zone and Arms Race. Does that sound fair? I will give them credit for carrying over all the CSGO skins into the new title, but that is mostly because they knew the community would literally riot if their skins dropped in value too much due to a new release. Valve makes so much money off of the community market that I really think they didn't want to touch the model too much. One of those situations where if it isn't broke, you shouldn't spend time trying to fix it. The community market will always be a money printer. When a company gets as successful as Valve has, it can be hard for them not to rest on their laurels. They are making money hand over fist and it seems like it will never end. However, the way the monetization works in CS2 makes me feel like a cheap money cow more than a valued player. In CSGO, I spent a lot of money, like too much money, but the way the transactions work in the new game don't leave the same feeling as the old ones did. I know that might be more of a personal issue, but when the gameplay is in a state of disrepair and doesn't seem to be getting better, it feels stupid to be shelling out money on the game regardless of how cool the new skins are. One sneaky trick Valve was able to pull that is pretty genius in an evil genius sort of way, was that they knew that many players were not going to love the changes they were making to the game. So instead of making it a separate release with its own review page, they just released it as an update to CSGO. This meant that all of the positive reviews that game got helped offset the onslaught of negative reviews they received after updating to CS2. There is a clear feeling in a game when you can tell it has gone from a game the developer truly has a passion for, into a game that is going to keep releasing skins until the money stops flowing in. It feels like Valve has true disdain for this game and its community. While their communication has improved slightly since CSGO, it's not like that is saying a whole lot. They barely said anything in the past, and their current communication feels like it's written by someone with a degree in public relations. The communication feels tone deaf when the community is calling for changes to the servers, engine, gameplay mechanics, and map pool, and they seem to ignore it entirely whenever making any statements on the game. It feels like over at Valve HQ they installed a filter to make sure any negative feedback for the game doesn't get back to the devs. They just keep marching on pretending everyone is in love with their new title and can't get enough. I will say CS is a franchise that will always be pretty profitable just because of how prolific it is. It will be hard to convince Valve to change until the money printer turns off. As long as there is a die-hard community shelling out money for the game, literally nothing is going to change. While I have personally stopped making purchases within CS2, the game was able to make $1 billion in just a few months after its release. From Valve's perspective, the community could be picketing outside of their HQ every day. As long as the game is continuing to make tens of millions in profit every month, they aren't going to change. The one thing the community really doesn't seem to understand is that voting with their wallet is the best way to make a change. No amount of negative reviews is going to matter if their quarterly profit is higher than the one previously. It is the equivalent of rewarding a dog for bad behavior. If you give Fido a treat every time he poops in your bedroom, pretty soon you'll always be stepping in poop. I wish Valve would be willing to make the changes to make CS a better game that could reach the full potential of the franchise, but I don't think they are going to do anything as long as they can buy a new yacht every year. They need to knock it off with this whole sub-tick server garbage and actually commit to upgrading the infrastructure behind the game to let the engine thrive. The engine also is not finished, I get it. They had a crunch and needed to have a new engine for the game to run on, but they need to actually polish this turd they put out into the world. I know they are totally capable of it. This is the same studio that revolutionized gaming several times. I think that is actually what is most frustrating about this. It would be one thing if this was some small indie studio that didn't have the resources to really develop a game thoroughly and know what it was like before publishing. But this is one of the biggest gaming companies in the world that went out of their way to let all their fans know they just don't really care about their support through the years. Valve needs to step up to the plate and save this franchise before people continue to jump ship for the better offerings that are coming to the market. It sucks because CS has such deep history in the gaming community, but this is how franchises die. There are just going to be more games released that are going to be trying to corner the same market as Valve, and the more they let their player numbers drop, the harder it is going to be to make a comeback. CSGO did manage to have a huge resurgence 4 years after its release, so maybe we just need to be ready to wait a few more years for this game to enter its golden era. Who knows, but Gabe can't rest on his throne forever without someone trying to take it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate you pressing the like button to help us in the algorithm. We are starting to post 2 gaming videos a week now and would love your support as we try to hit 10,000 subscribers. If you have any suggestions as to what Valve could do to make this a better game, then be sure to drop them down below too. Our last video was an exploration into the Fallout universe and explaining a majority of the Vault experiments from Fallout lore. If you want to watch it, then it's on screen now, so give it a click. It's pretty long and is good for if you're doing homework or chores through the day. Thank you all so much for watching.